How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today, there's no wind. It's hot as heck out here, and we're walking the goats. The last two podcasts, it was weird because it was like this, but then we got a bunch of wind towards the end. But, I'm trying to find the right AI program to take out the wind. I've used a couple free ones, but then I used up all my time already. And then they're pretty good. I'm just trying to figure out which one is going to be the best for the podcast. But, when I run the AI on the audio tracks, then I'll re-upload it, and they'll be in the same spot because every episode has a season and an episode. So, but anyways, getting to the point of today. Today we're going to be talking about Opuntia ficus indica, one of the most known cacti species in the world, probably, if not the most known in the world. Opuntia ficus indica is cultivated in Africa, Europe, the Americas, obviously, North, South, and Central, and it's cultivated in the Middle East. I've seen people even in Palestine growing it. It's in Israel, unfortunately. It's in a lot of different places. But today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a topic that I've been discussing a lot with some of my friends, which is why Opuntia ficus indica is such a shitty plant, and maybe some of the stuff that we could do to fix that, right? So, to put it into context, Opuntia ficus indica, there's probably millions of acres of it grown around the world, and most of it is propagated by clone, and sort of like the Agave Angustifolia subspecies tequiliana, cultivar Blue Weber, as that goes into tequila, that can solely be the species that tequila is made from, as well as the main species in mezcal, 99+% probably, which is Agave Angustifolia subspecies espadin. And both these are Agave Angustifolia subspecies, right? They're both part of the Angustifolia complex. But sort of like these agave, most of the Opuntia ficus indica cultivation is coming from pads. Now that's due to a lot of different factors, but it's almost like the same exact story with the agave, in that most of the new farms are being propagated from clones of older farms, and that's because just like agave seeds here, cacti seed propagation is relatively unknown and new to most cactus farmers. Most people are, poor propagators of cactus, I'd say, compared to a lot of other different species. Now, like I said, this is due to cactus being newer on the cultivation timeline than, say, roses or, say, trees or different type of stuff that people have had, more experience with for a longer portion of time. And because of all the new farms being propagated from clones, it's the same thing in agave, where the genetic diversity of Opuntia ficus indica is so low that they pretty much all deal with the same issues, even thousands of miles away on different continents, right? So I've done a podcast on how North African nations are dealing with cochineal and have hundreds of thousands of acres of cochineal planted, and a lot of that production is starting to die out because of cochineal. And there's lots of different areas around the world where Opuntia ficus indica is dying, in really large quantities. And here's the thing, like before, for the past decades, maybe even century, most of Opuntia ficus indica, cochineal, and plagues, insects, all of these things that affect the plant have been dealt with by chemicals. So just like agave, it's insane how similar these are, right? These two stories. But just like agave, it's been sprayed to shit, and this cactus almost, in many areas cannot grow without these chemicals, right? So they're needed for its prosperity, you could say, because it's gotten so weak genetically it can't fight the insects, the disease, the fungi on its own anymore, that they have to chemically spray it. Which means too, if you want to do like stuff that I'm doing, like dry farming with no chemicals, indigenous knowledge type agriculture, then you kind of get screwed, because if you buy these pads, you end up starting your farm with very, very weak genetics, and because you're not following the same protocol of chemical spraying, tillage, and those plants, they can't combat that stuff on their own and end up dying most of the time, right? So I learned this the hard way by buying a bunch of Opuntia ficus indica from Mexico, like a bulk order, and all of them died here. Like not one of them died or didn't die. And some died because the cold, some died because the heat, some died because the wind, but most died by insects. And I'd say the grand majority of those died from cochineal. So in a system that is not spraying, these plants really fail like hard, and kind of why I was relating that is that in many areas, like in North Africa, that they copied the Mexican system of chemical spraying and monoculture and single genetics of Opuntia ficus indica, cloning the heck out of it, not starting any seed that brings you new cultivars, or not hybridizing, or not doing anything to prioritize the genetics to each area, just literally taking pads and placing them everywhere around the world. Well, the plants no longer, even with the chemical spraying, the fungicides, the pesticides, the herbicides, they no longer are able to prosper even with that chemical spraying. So in the example of Africa, they're spraying in many cases the heck out of their Opuntia ficus indica, right? Because they don't want to lose those hundreds of thousands of acres that I'm telling you are under risk, right? I'm talking about 20% of, if I remember correctly, like 600 plus thousand acres, which amounts to over 120,000 acres that they potentially believe in the next few years will get destroyed by cochineal. So no longer are the chemicals working. Like, it's gotten so weak that it's just not able to prosper like that if it gets the plague. And a lot of times these insects and stuff can sneak on pads because of lax biosecurity controls, importing them into different countries, right? That doesn't really happen with the U.S. because they like I've explained with agave, any plant that comes into the U.S. needs to be pesticide, insecticided, to basically guarantee that nothing is going to come onto that or into the United States that may be a pathogen. Which, look, sounds great on paper. That's what keeps a lot of our plants safe. But the problem is that people are importing plants, and they basically have a few issues. They can't check every batch of plants, so some stuff always sneaks by as far as insects or plagues or whatever. And then essentially you're buying a super chemically sprayed plant, guaranteed, no matter where it's coming from, even if it came from like a quote-unquote organic farm in Mexico, right? Because at the border, it is mandatory. It's not something that, oh, no, I don't want to spray my plants. Like, okay, well, you can't import them into the United States, right? So you're starting your farm off on a bad foot, like I've mentioned with the whole agave that's being imported into California. Many of these farmers want to do, say, indigenous knowledge agriculture, not use any chemicals, tillage, low human labor. The plants won't respond to this system, right? So the same thing's happening in agave in California, right? Like, say, grape farmers are importing these plants that are heavily sprayed and then trying to put them into a system that they're foreign to, these plants. And to be honest with you, I'm seeing really poor results with Mexican imported agave. The ones that I have seen, you could say, okay results with, are from large corporate farmers, which are chemically spraying their plants. So they're following the Mexican system, the whole rule book, you could say, right? The monoculture, the species, and the spraying, right? So it's working for them, but they're selling it to people that are, you could say, farmers that don't want to use any chemicals and don't want to do monoculture, and these plants are failing fucking hard. The same thing happening in Opuntia ficus indica, right? So it's really interesting how the Agave Angustifolia and the Opuntia ficus indica stories end up lining up almost perfectly as far as low genetic diversity. And the unfortunate part, for people like me that are born in Mexico, and we're from the areas where Opuntia ficus indica, as well as Agave Angustifolias are native, essentially, or not native, being planted, in large numbers, in large monocultures, is sad, because we know what happens when, that happens, right? So it's like, this is why I've almost just stopped following a lot of agave people on Instagram, because it's like, everybody smiles and is extremely happy when they see a monoculture of Agave Angustifolia, subspecies tequiliana, cultivar, Blue Weber. They see this field and they're like, oh, it's beautiful, I can't wait to go to tequila, and everybody, this, commoditization of agave has led to some bad stuff, and we've forgotten the indigenous ways, and these monocultures, when I see it, I think back to the areas that were destroyed to put all these fields in, because when I see a blue field of Agave tequiliana, I remember, oh fuck, that used to have all these trees. We used to go hiking there. There used to be a little waterfall there. There used to be all these features in nature. And then now it's just a fucking sea of Agave tequiliana that is destroying the water resources, destroying the biodiversity of the ecosystem, destroying even the people, because now it's so unprofitable. In the end, was it a great idea to destroy all of our forests around, the tequila region, where I was born, Agualulco del Mercado? You drive everywhere through that valley, it's fucking ecosystems being destroyed on the daily to put in Agave tequiliana, bullshit monoculture. And once again, for what? All these farmers aren't making money. The tequila companies are making money, but most of those are foreign owned by Americans and Europeans and multinational corporations. Mexicans have to start asking themselves, is it worth it? You know what I mean? And as a Mexican, I look at the town that I was born in. I remember the places I used to hike and walk in, and it's a sea of bullshit Agave tequiliana now. And others are a sea of Opuntia ficus indica. And, I don't think it was worth it. 100%, definitely not. So, Opuntia ficus indica, just like Agave tequiliana, the pads are on the floor. They're less than a peso. You get me? And what I was saying is Opuntia ficus indica, most of the prickly pear, most of the pads are on the floor. Very little money in it. And we're just doing the same thing with agave, you know, just destroying the ecosystem and plant a monoculture of Opuntia ficus indica. And no, you know, the Mexicans aren't making money. Maybe the packers importing it into the United States are making money, but definitely not the fools selling the raw material off their farms. Not many of them, at least, unless they're cutting tons of corners, you know. It's really unfortunate what's happening with these two plants, but Opuntia ficus indica, you know, as I was saying, I was discussing it a lot with some of my friends, and I'm just like, you know, is it the plant, man, or is it us? You know, is it that humans have, over the last 100 years, destroyed a lot of the indigenous genetics that was prioritized for this Opuntia ficus indica, and now we're left with just the monoculture derived clone genetics that the corporations instituted to mass scale propagate Opuntia ficus indica, you know? And yeah, it's a tough one there, because most of my experience with the Opuntia ficus indica is it can't drop under 30 Fahrenheit, which means most of the United States is off range to it, right? Like, it can't grow there. It can't tolerate the extreme Mojave Desert 120 Fahrenheit heat, you know? You can't tolerate a lot of this wind that we get 3-4 times a week. That's crazy as fuck. Like, past 3 days, it's been like 30 miles, 40 miles an hour winds. Dries the plants out like crazy. And then obviously, cochineal, as I mentioned, has destroyed a lot of Opuntia ficus indica in the area, in Mexico, in the United States. You know, it doesn't discriminate. Like I mentioned, it's all over the world, and it's destroying Opuntia ficus indica everywhere it's planted, pretty much, because most of the genetics is from clone. Now, the counter to this Opuntia ficus indica not being a species that you should plant, right, was when I started finding cultivars that were seeded, right? So kind of like the grapefruit story I've mentioned to you several times. A lot of the times when you seed a plant, you know, you just throw the fruit down that you were eating, and you never know what might come up, right? And then, like, there was a grapefruit variety that was seeded resistant to HLB, right, that somebody had just thrown in their backyard, right? Well, it's almost like the same shit's happening with the prickly pear, because a lot of seeded varieties that were just fruits of Opuntia ficus indica that people tossed into their landscapes, and then these seeds sprouted and grew new cacti. Many of these Opuntia ficus indica have taken on the traits of every area and become really, really strong plants. So a few of these cultivars that I wouldn't call it discovered, but more like come across, is you know, Opuntia ficus indica cultivar Lancaster, which is a seeded cultivar that was you know, given to me. Well, not given to me. I mean, I had to fucking go grab it and stuff and get these cacti out this person's yards. But then these were seeded variety that or cultivar that was started from just a fruit, you know, and then a bunch of seeds sprouted, and one ended up becoming a tall ass tree that had a lot of pads, right, that I was able to plant. And then we also have cultivar Lake Los Angeles, which is another seeded cultivar that has been growing, you know, even further east than the cultivar Lancaster. So it had more wind, more, you know, the cultivar Lancaster was in a backyard. So it was in a tough climate of Lancaster, but it wasn't exposed completely. But that one still, I had a lot of luck with. It was cold hardy to 14 Fahrenheit. I shipped it places. It was cold hardy to 10. It was heat hardy to the 120, like I was saying. It was wind hardy. It was right next to other Opuntia ficus indica that had a cochineal and didn't get it. It was really resistant to lots of other plagues and insects that other Opuntia succumbed to. And then this Opuntia ficus indica cultivar Lake LA has been, the strongest one that I've gotten so far, right? And it's very, very resistant to a lot of the insects out here. And then I also have cultivar Burbank spineless, which was a cultivar derived or bred here from Opuntia ficus indica by, the famous cactus breeder Burbank. And, that species is a spineless Opuntia ficus indica. And it grows great out here. It's actually pretty cold hardy because the homie was growing a lot of this stuff in colder areas and mountainous areas. And, that one has proven cold hardy to just the 14 Fahrenheit here. So the minimum that it's reached on my farm has been the minimum it's sustained across different areas we've planted it across the country. Cultivar High Vista, or cultivar, Lake LA, probably cold hardy to 5 Fahrenheit. Cultivar Lancaster, hardy to 10 Fahrenheit. And cultivar Burbank spineless, which was, hardy to 14 Fahrenheit. So these three beat out by almost, in the lowest case of Burbank spineless by 16 degrees, and then in the, the other case, 20 plus degrees or whatever, right? So, and then it could take a lot of the heat in the wind, all three of these varieties. Now, Burbank spineless has been a little bit harder to grow because it's loved by a lot of insects that, like grasshoppers and different insects native to my area, which will be trying to munch on the pads because there's not as much spines. They could just literally land on it and start munching away, right? Whereas cultivar Lancaster and cultivar Lake LA have been much more resistant to the insects because they have spines, and aren't, it looks to be as, they look to not hold as much water, you know what I mean? So it's like a spineless cactus that holds a lot of water in its pads. Great, so you don't got to water it a lot, but it attracts insects because and even rodents, because they know, fuck, this shit's full of water, it's nice and plump, So it's tough sometimes with that, with the wildlife. They, same species, different cultivars, they affect it completely differently, right? And the same thing has happened to me with Agave Americana, right? Like I've had some cultivars that are highly susceptible to agave weevil, some that are highly resistant, some that are, medium resistant, and across the board, I probably grow like 12 different Americanas, and they all grow and have resistances that are all completely different, right? So that's the interesting part behind that, how much all of that could vary based on the genetics, right? Just being twisted a tad bit or two. So, I've seen so much variety in the different cultivars of seeded Opuntia ficus indica. Yeah, I started to, discuss this with some of the other cultivators that start stuff from seed, and they were having similar results. A lot of people starting Opuntia ficus indica in really cold climates, really hot climates that if you looked at the tolerances of Opuntia ficus indica, they shouldn't be living there. But once again, this is where the clone genetics of the pads could be limiting a lot of places where Opuntia ficus indica could go, and a lot of different farms and how they farm this crop, right? Or where they farm this crop. And it is really interesting seeing how far east and north seeded Opuntia ficus indica is, right? And a lot of these cactus cultivators, are pushing the limits when it comes to a lot of this seed genetics. And for instance, I kill a lot of cactus because I'm breeding, and obviously, like, I'm trying to prioritize for certain traits like drought tolerance or size of fruits and prickly pear in size of pads, you know, spines and things like this. And you know, the ones that don't fit your mold, you're really getting rid of them or putting them aside to maybe serve some other farmer in, you know, a different way, right? And yeah, I just have been arguing to a few of my friends that Opuntia ficus indica, while on paper across the world seems to be an extremely weak genetic pool of a cactus, the cactus quickly reverts to a lot of this evolution or, you know, adaptation that the indigenous were growing it in, right? Because the indigenous of Mexico and the United States were not growing Opuntias in a monoculture, right? So Opuntia ficus indica traditionally in Mexico would have been grown with corn, with squash, with beans, with agave, with mesquite, with punco, the palo verde that I'm growing here, food crops, right? And they were, you know, people talk a lot about the Meteplantle system, and you know, the way of growing agave with you know, the three sisters and different vegetables and stuff. But it was greater than that. That's just one form. You know, in all these different states, they had different methods of these polyculture systems based on the endemic plants that were there, right? So every state had different leguminous trees, fruit trees, fruiting cactus, fruiting or agave, right, is technically a fruit as well. But they had different agave, right? So we all think it was like this same system everywhere, but it wasn't. There was lots and lots of different diversity even among the systems. So I mentioned that diversity of systems because maybe that's, you know, what I'm getting at, that the one system that Opuntia ficus indica over maybe the past 100 years since it's been industrialized, this system, it's not working. You get me? And maybe we need to start growing Opuntia ficus indica in a variety of different other systems and seeding it and hybridizing it to bring back some of those great traits that the indigenous made from it, right? So the only reason I'm even giving Opuntia ficus indica a chance, even though it failed for me so many times, was that the pads are gigantic. They're really great for eating. They're mild flavor. They're not as sour as many of the Opuntias, which is, you know, I give it up to them. It's like the whole thing with tequiliana, Agave tequiliana, right? It's like, it is a great cactus, and then it produces some large prickly pears. And among those, there's lots of different varieties of the fruit, but many of them are large, right, in the Opuntia ficus indica species. So I'll give the example, right? The ones I brought from Mexico before they died, they did fruit, and they were large fruits, the size of, you know, well, even larger than a golf ball, right? Probably twice the size of a golf ball. And the pads are, you know, 9 to 12 inches. Great for, you know, having a lot of pad that you can eat. And like I said, mild taste, right? So, and then it's such a quick growing Opuntia. So while I kept failing, I'm like, come on, one of these has to hit, you know? And then some of the seeded cultivars that I've developed, which is, you know, cultivar High Vista, which is a hybrid between, what do you call it? Cultivar Lancaster and cultivar Burbank Spineless. That hybrid that I made, High Vista, is, you know, also in this big pad, big fruit category, even though it's a hybrid, right? But it's a hybrid of two Opuntia ficus indica cultivars, right? So all of these cultivars I've seen are really great, and I was just bummed out I couldn't grow them here without the chemicals, and, you know, yeah, they were just really disease-ridden, right? So these cultivars I started finding and creating, hybrids I created, they started to give me some hope in Opuntia ficus indica, and I started to see, you know, what me and my friends would discuss even years ago, which is that sometimes the cactus is not the problem, it is the cultivator or the farmer, right? And in this case of Opuntia ficus indica, I would definitely say that it's a incredible plant. When I am talking about that I hate Opuntia ficus indica in many podcasts, that I think it's a shitty plant, I am talking about the cloned variety. And in many cases, the same case or the same thing with Agave tequiliana or Agave Angustifolia, subspecies tequiliana, cultivar blue Weber. Damn, that's a fucking long name. Yeah, that fucker, if you seed it, there's lots of great tequiliana cultivars, right? You know, if you read Ana Valenzuela's book on tequila, you'll see that prior to blue Weber becoming the industrial version that was adopted in most of tequila, there was actually 4 different tequiliana cultivars, and I know of at least 6 different tequiliana cultivars that are in the United States, right? That are separate to those original 4 from Mexico. So that's a total of 10. Now you start including people like me that have hybridized tequiliana for the same reason I'm talking about how it just sucked dick for me. And then, like, you know, the Opuntia ficus indica, the same thing. I started hybridizing it because I'm like, man, well, it sucks, but it's such a strong species that maybe with Ficantha, maybe with Littoralis, some of these colder, hardier species that I have, those hybrids started performing for me, and that's how I was able to have some Opuntia ficus genetics, and that ended up improving some of the native USA cactus, because the Opuntia ficantha times Opuntia ficus indica Lancaster, that one has enlarged the fruit of ficantha, which is a smaller prickly pear, and has made it a larger plant. So ficantha and Littoralis are more ground covers, whereas Opuntia ficus indica is an arborescent Opuntia, much like a tree. So the hybrids between these have created something kind of like in the middle, which would be kind of like a shrub, you know, like a blueberry shrub. So many of these ground cover Opuntia are, you know, 4-6 feet tall max, the Littoralis and ficantha, whereas the Opuntia ficus indica, the Opuntia angelmanis, a lot of these arborescent cacti can get, you know, 15-20 feet tall as trees and form secondary growth and some pretty large trunks, right? So same with Opuntia robusta, Opuntia smay, all of these fucking giants are arborescents. So my, you know, ideal in the future is to have a lot of these arborescent growing in the vertical space and having the ground covers growing in the, you know, obviously the ground. That way I could have 2-3 production plants in one area, right? And there'll be a mix of species and stuff, but I'm just saying, like, one ground cover, one shrub, one tree, right? But in this case, they'll all be cactus. But yeah, so Opuntia ficus indica, it's been a real journey with it, I would say. But, you know, I do realize that even though a lot of it is horrible products, this is where it is starting to get, or it gets real interesting, right? Because a lot of the Opuntia pads have gone to labs and they've tested it, and they're really high in tons of nutrients and minerals and, you know, vitamins, and you know, some of those key ones could be like magnesium, you know, fiber, iron. You know, it has tons of shit that's great for you, to the point that a lot of people call it, you know, prickly pears and the prickly pear pads, which are referred to as Nopales. They call them superfoods, right? But here's where it gets interesting, that most of that research is solely Opuntia ficus indica, because that's really the only shit that's available for people to test and stuff, and what people are cultivating in Mexico, right? And across the world, as I mentioned. So they're testing Opuntia ficus indica that's grown in a monoculture with chemicals, all of this stuff, and it's coming up with, you know, a high range of nutrients, macro and micronutrients, and vitamins, right? Now, that's really exciting, because what happens when you grow this Opuntia ficus indica in an indigenous polyculture system that doesn't use chemicals and is improving the soil every single year, right? In my opinion as a consultant, you'll have higher bricks in the prickly pear, you'll have higher, you know, nutrient value in the pads, right? And here's where it also gets interesting. I'm telling you, most of the Opuntia ficus indica is chemically sprayed and grown in a monoculture, right? Well, it's kind of like a lot of these testings that have been going on in the United States recently on vegetables and how they're finding out it has tons of trace amounts of pesticides. Well, you know, you have to think about it here. If they're spraying the crap out of the Opuntia ficus indica, not only is it full of a lot of those nutrients and stuff, but it's also full of a lot of those trace pesticides, or trace herbicides, trace insecticides, especially insecticides, like I mentioned, the cochineal probably being the biggest threat to Opuntia ficus indica, but not the sole threat. There's tons of them for Opuntia ficus indica because it has been cultivated all over the world. It's the same thing that happens to agave, right? So when agave price goes to the ground, people abandon fields, and then nature finds a way to get rid of all of these agave, or in what we're talking about today, Opuntia ficus indica. No matter the country, no matter the place, the climate, the whatever, it finds an insect, it finds fungi, it finds a plague, a virus, something that will get rid of these pads and return that biomass back into the soil, which is what nature desires when this system is failing, right? So when people abandon the fields, when the price of Opuntia ficus indica or Agave Angustifolias in Oaxaca or Jalisco are, you know, at the floor and are a trash price, unprofitable price, you know, in Jalisco today and in many places, harvesting Opuntia ficus indica is actually negative profit. Yeah, it leads people to abandon the fields, right? And just many times, the best case actually is to set it on fire, because you return all of that as biochar back into the soil, as ash into the soil, and you don't allow it to naturally rot and attract those pests, those, you know, all these things, right? So when the price is super low, I'm not the biggest huge fan of government aid, but this is definitely where the government should step in and be like, okay, well, you can't just abandon the field. We'll fucking help you just destroy it all. You get me? And this benefits the greater, you know, agave industry or Opuntia industry, Nopales industry, because it prevents a lot of these diseases from becoming an outbreak, right? So in agave, we've talked about in the podcast how on several occasions, anywhere from 20 to 40% of all of the Agave tequiliana has been destroyed by a plague or an insect. And in the Opuntia ficus indica case, that is happening in Africa today, right? As we were talking about earlier as well, through cochineal. It's destroying hundreds of thousands of acres. And they can't stop it no matter all the chemical spraying that they attempt. Well, I would have advised them highly to start seeding the fuck out of those Opuntia ficus indica and having biosecurity standards while they develop. But, you know, let others fail so that the, you know, people that deserve to farm come up, in my opinion. You know, sometimes you need failure. Like, you know, I was reading about the bailout of the peach farmers here in California, and I'm just like, come on, man. They had one, I was talking about it earlier in the other podcast, but it's like they had, you know, just Del Monte that they were selling their peaches to for canning, and it's like none of them thought to have their own cannery, to have a co-op cannery, to come together and buy the fucking Del Monte at bankruptcy on the steal price. Like, you know, a lot of people deserve to fail, and in that case, it's like the disease is not taking out the peaches. It's just poor decision making by many of those business owners that were just every year selling their peaches to one source and cashing the check and very happy, right? Or content or whatever. If not, they would have found another fucking way to sell their peaches, right? So they were content. And then when Del Monte's gone, now, oh, I'm fucked. That's on you, man. You know, if I'm a landscaper, I'm also a farmer, I'm a consultant. If my clients drop me, I don't go to the government and be like, oh, bro, my client dropped me, I'm fucked, I'm not going to be able to do this, that, you know, please help me, you know. It's like, get it together, get another fucking client, figure the fuck out, you know. The times that people have wanted to buy my prickly pear and not bought it, that's when I created the jams. That's when I created different seed oils. That's when I diversified, right? The times people in Mexico have been fucked over contracts of agave and not sold their agave, they've created their own distilleries. Stop being a bitch and innovate, you know? Like, so that's why I'm not in favor of the peach growers getting a bailout. But going back to the initial point, that, you know, Opuntia farms and agave farms, they really should, the government should step in and not allow people to abandon their farms. Light that bitch on fire, you know. Although it is a lot of carbon going into the air, there's ways to get carbon back into the ground, right? Through regenerative agriculture, ranching, farming, all of these perennial cacti. They're going to be for decades in the ground sequestrating carbon. I mean, you know, there's ways to return that carbon, but there's not going to be a way to stop that plague once it started, right? So I do sometimes think the government intervention is necessary in the case when it's going to affect everyone. So if a few farmers not being able to sell their Opuntia ficus indica because they'll go bankrupt, abandon a field, the government needs to step in Mexico or even here in the USA in the future and destroy the field, because then the whole industry gets fucked. And if you want a real life story to put it into perspective today, look at grapes. All the grapes that are being abandoned today, now in Napa, they're starting to want to fine you. And in many cases, in some places and cities, they are fining you for leaving your vineyards abandoned, because these vineyards are going to shit through the same thing like agave and Opuntia, like I was just describing. Insects, fungi, viruses, all of these things that nature has in its, you know, pocketbook to destroy a field. And then it passes to the next field that this guy was still in the game, had a healthy fucking vineyard. Boom, gets taken out because his neighbor went bankrupt. So now you got two that went bankrupt because that guy's fields go to shit now, right? So now I agree, you know, few times do I agree with the government being able to fine a farmer. But yeah, bro, like, you know, all these vineyards 4 or 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, we're getting thousands upon tens of thousands per acre for their grapes. And you're telling me in all these years that they were making mills on mills, none of them decided to say it? Come on now. A lot of those guys deserve to go out of business. The ones that are still in grapes, they've been in grapes and they're going to stay in grapes. I mean, because they know how to go past these depressions, right? Especially like right now, the economy's bad. The wine industry is on the fucking floor in the United States and globally. Well, these vineyards that stay in the game, they got to innovate, right? A lot of the grapes is the same shit with the agave and the Opuntia today. No money in it. So if you want to do grapes, before maybe you could just sell your grapes and make hella millions. Now, nope. You better fucking, you know, have your own winery. You better have events. You better have animals, you know, to not buy fertilizers and have lower workers. I mean, you can't do it the same. You know what I mean? This unlimited, unparalleled growth in California vineyards is over. And if you want to stay in the game, you better innovate. You better go back to indigenous methods of growing a lot of these plants, because they're the ways that are going to be the lowest cost and the healthiest for your plants to have the highest quality that you can sell and make the most money. So agave grapes and Opuntia today are much in the same boat. It's really interesting because I'm involved in all three industries. But it's real crazy to see all the parallels, because it's always like a very similar story, and that's why I'm bringing it up to y'all. But yeah, Opuntia ficus indica, you know, today, those fields that are being abandoned is going to affect everybody for sure. And, you know, I look to Jalisco, I look to Guanajuato, right? Guanajuato's got a garambullo, which is a Myrtillo cactus geometrans industry. Little blueberry-sized fruits on the garambullos, really amazing. Jalisco's got Stenocereus tuberi. You know, a little bit south in Querétaro, you have Stenocereus querétarensis. Fuck, that's a hard one to pronounce. It's Querétaroensis. and that's the other pitaya. And then in some states in Mexico now, people are returning to the cultivation of dragon fruit. And yes, I say returning because dragon fruit comes from Mexico. If you did not know, it does not come from Vietnam or Southeast Asia or wherever the fuck you see people growing it nowadays. And again, some of these dragon fruit farmers in the United States that are starting up, they're doing like the monocultures of Asia, whereas some of the dragon fruit farmers that I'm seeing start up in Mexico, they're going back to their indigenous roots and very much growing it in a polyculture, which is great to see. Not to say that there isn't monocultures of dragon fruit, but I guess the point that I was trying to make here right now is that now people are diversifying. That maybe we're Opuntia ficus indica farmers. They're growing garambullos. They're growing choconosle. They're growing Opuntia reina. They're growing all these different types of different, pitayas, different colored pitayas, lots of different cultivars, right? There's the purple, the red, the yellow. Man, there's a lot of really great ones. People are even, like I said, growing the choconosle, really great fruits. This is great. This is going to bring the price of Opuntia ficus indica up and also give people a diversification, right? Why not grow Opuntia ficus indica, pitayas, garambullo? All of these agave or cacti that produce fruits, why not grow them all on one farm? And you grow all of that in your state in Mexico or in California, right? That'd be dope. I mean, the problem with the pitayas, the garambullo, a lot of these is they don't drop under 25. So they could really only be grown in coastal California. Or, even stuff that's not in the coast, like, just not very inland where it drops under 25 to 30 Fahrenheit, which is most of the state, honestly. At least in landmass. And that's why the dragon fruit farms you see are like in San Diego and shit, because they can't have them in most of the places that we farm. Central Valley gets too cold, and the desert gets too cold, and NorCal gets too cold. It has these little pockets where they could grow, Santa Barbara, LA, even Riverside, San Diego, those places, yeah. But not here. Anyways, though, Opuntia ficus indica, going back to the topic of today, right? It's like this cultivar I've definitely seen, or this species of cactus I've definitely seen hold a lot of potential to be a cactus that could be grown all over the United States. And through seeding it, not through buying clones that are imported, you're going to have to plant the seeds from stuff that are already in the United States and already have begun some adaptation. And many of those varieties, as I mentioned, or cultivars or hybrids, are a little bit more genetically diverse than the stuff that will be imported anyway. But this gives a lot of hope also. This, observations, it gives a lot of hope to other Opuntia, right? Because I'm like, well, Opuntia ficanta gets negative 20 Fahrenheit. Can I begin seedlings? Like, well, my Opuntia ficanta, some of them, I have a seedling, a high vista. That one is a little bit more cold hardy. And I'm seeing this thing that I'm describing with Opuntia ficus indica, the seedlings being extremely more hardy. I'm seeing this a lot with, the other Opuntia. So I've made an Opuntia ficanta that's 5 degrees colder, right? Like I've shipped that seedlings out to places as, they're not seedlings, but, seeds that I planted grew up into like little cacti. I shipped those to areas where it gets to negative 25 and more snow, and they're still living great, right? The lowest cactus in the wild has survived up here is negative 30 Fahrenheit with lots of snow. So I believe maybe through some of these cultivars, seeding a lot of them, hybridizing a lot of them, maybe we could find some traits in the genetic pool that allow cacti to go to negative 40, maybe negative 50. Who knows? Who fucking knows? But we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing the cactus. And Opuntia ficus indica, I still think has a lot to prove to me. And a lot of the other cactus, like I said, I think they can be improved by this same method of seeding and then crossing the seedlings, So it's like I told you, I'm seeing cultivars of Opuntia ficus indica like Lancaster and like LA, or High Vista or Burbank Spineless perform for me, and now I'm crossing those, right? But it's still an Opuntia ficus indica. So it's like, there's lots and lots of ways. That's the type of breeding that Burbank did. He just kept seeding, and when he found different traits in them, he would then make hybrids and keep seeding, and then make hybrids until he kept breeding the traits that he liked, right? That's how he came across the spineless Opuntia ficus indica. And I take, like I'm gonna do the same thing, basically. So I take a lot of inspiration from people like Burbank, people that have been breeders of cactus in, California. Like, for instance, even the Huntington Garden, lots of institutions like UCLA, places that have made lots of really cool developments in cacti, and, I'm trying to learn from whoever I can to continue improving genetics and see what stuff I should cross. But, I love that I've crossed a lot of the USA Opuntia with Opuntia ficus indica, because, like I said, it's the main crop that people recognize as Nopales from Mexico. It's the main crop grown around the Americas and the world. And I'm crossing it with, California prickly pear, with Texas prickly pear, with, prickly pears from Arizona and the East Coast, and, like Humifusa, and creating something like me, a hybrid that's American, that's Mexican, a little bit of both. And I think those hybrids are really cool because, as I've mentioned before, a lot of the USA Opuntia are ground cover. And they're hardier. They're better with the cold. They're better with the heat. They're better with the wind. They're better with the elevation. But then the Mexican Opuntia ficus indica has bigger pads, bigger fruit, and is a really fast grower, right? Been proven in a lot of different climates. So combining the traits of these through the hybrid, now we're coming across some shit that may be something that, can be an Opuntia that's binational. You get me something that can be grown in both countries reliably, right? You won't have the case where you take, like, for instance, a lot of people have imported Opuntia ficus indica and it's gone to shit here. Or you won't have the case where a lot of people have imported lots of American cactus and, they're not very great for the Mexicans, right? So I think combining some of these Mexican and United States Opuntia may create something that both the countries like and can farm and can profit from and all of that. But yeah, as I was describing, we've started to take some of these hardier cultivars of Opuntia ficus indica that we got and hybridizing them with our strongest Opuntia that are growing on the farm. And we're getting good results, getting some exciting stuff, and hope in the future to release some of those, but it's gonna take time. The hybrids is a slow process, and I just encourage people that want to cultivate Nopales or prickly pear in the United States to not import, to use what's around you. There's lots of prickly pear fruits that have been tossed on the ground, and seedlings have grown into monsters that it's kind of like the Agave Americana. It's like there's lots of different cultivars that are uniquely Californian now. It's become naturalized here. And the Opuntia ficus indica has had the same luck in many places in California here. And a lot of those genetics may be the genetics, like I said, that hold the key to being something legit, right? So it's like, I give the example of avocados. I mean, this is also something that was lost in the Eden fire, a lot of avocado genetics, because Altadena used to have tons of nurseries and different people at the 1800s, 1900s that grew avocados. So there used to be lots of seedlings that were started, right? So there was lots of different cultivars of avocado. And if you're unfamiliar, probably the second most planted avocado in California is Fuerte. And Fuerte came from fucking Altadena. It was just a seed that was planted in somebody's backyard. And, somebody ended up figuring out that this would be a great cultivar to farm. But I personally saw lots of different cultivars of avocado in Altadena that were trees that were, 80, 100, sometimes, really old, and they did not look like anything I had ever seen on an avocado farm or grown in someone's backyard as a landscaper. You get me? A lot of these avocados look to be completely alien to the shit that I had seen. And my point is, we as as farmers, as collectors, have forgot how to seed. We forgot, we've gotten confident with agave and cactus, just like, oh, it's so easy to propagate by clones, fuck it, it's so easy. That now the plants that we love have become genetically weak, and the way to reverse that is to seed and hybridize the fuck out of them. And I think there's a lot of potential to do that, right, with the USA cultivars and the Mexican cultivars, to make them stronger. Just like agave is a very diverse family, Opuntia is even more diverse. It has hundreds of different fucking species, from Canada all the way to South fucking America. That shit's crazy, bro. And like the tip, like I always talk about how agave goes from, California to Texas to Florida and all the way down to the tip of South America, right? But cacti goes literally to fucking almost Patagonia. That shit's crazy. It colonized all of the Americas. And Opuntia, it's the same genus, which means that a lot of the same genetics were moving across with the humans that moved them across the Americas, by the animals, birds move these fuckers everywhere. But the different Opuntia adapted to every region in the Americas. They've adapted to Africa, they've adapted to Europe. My point is, they have an extreme amount of genetic diversity that's not being explored because people aren't seeding stuff anymore. So that's been a huge goal of mine, to just seed the hell out of everything, that we have, to always be improving the genetics, because you never know when some insects, some plagues, some virus is going to take the shit I have out, right? So if I'm always having lots of diversity of genetics, even in the same species, right, I tell you there could be lots of genetic diversity, then, I won't have trouble. And as I described, that happened to me with Agave Americana. Like, I've got 12 different cultivars of it and subspecies, and 2 of them got so affected by weevil that I just completely eliminated them from my farm. And the others were unaffected at all. 0. And I inspected them really, really well. So it goes to show you, even in the same species, shit could be completely on the opposite side spectrum genetically, right? So that gives a lot of hope to people that want to grow in colder areas, in more northern climates, in more east. It gives hope to, as I mentioned, I've shipped out to probably like 24 states, Opuntia, Littorales, Ficanta. But Opuntia ficus indica hybrids with Ficanta, maybe that could go in another 20 states. It's like, instead of just the West Coast. So it's like, through hybridizing, maybe you can push these genetics even into places further, or through seeding them, and that should be inspiration for you to want to keep pushing your genetics always, right? Like, it's cool to buy people's plants and shit. Like, I like when people buy my plants, obviously. I pay the bills. But at the same time, I'm like, start your own shit too, man. Like, buy my shit, start your own shit, hybridize them, do it all. Because you have to always be improving the genetics. And if you're not, you're going to end up in the problems that I've been speaking of today, where your Opuntia ficus indica is unprofitable and all that, right? And it's like, that's the other thing that I was talking about. It's like, the other day, prickly pear oil is so expensive, thousands of dollars per liter, and it's coming from these monoculture Opuntia ficus indica farms that are sometimes, in my opinion, just pieces of shit. But they're selling this shit for so expensive, and it's like, okay, in a polyculture, with no chemicals, with no bullshit fertilizers, that are synthetic and imported, if you make the product, 10 times better, what can you actually ask for your products, right? because a lot of the fanfare behind Opuntia ficus indica, I'm always like, you know, like, because I read a lot of articles about, like, oh, the prickly pears are superfoods, and I'm like, dude, like, I don't know if we should be pushing people to eat more of that prickly pear that's Mexican imported, because, like I said, it's heavily sprayed, and you know, it's sometimes weeks, if not months, frozen before it gets to us, and lost a lot of its nutritional content. And I'm like, well, what's the point in pushing people to eat some shitty version of the plant? You know, it's almost like the bananas too. It's like there's dozens and dozens of banana species, and they're really, really healthy for you. But this shit that they're giving us at the store, man, I mean, those bananas are some weak sauce shit, you know. As a Guatemalan, I'm really disappointed whenever I bite into a banana that is from a store. Tell you that much. And it's sad, you know, even in LA, I used to have gardens that I took care of for people where I had 15, you know, 18 different cultivars of banana. You know, blue Java, had the pink bananas from fucking Costa Rica, had, you know, purple bananas, had fucking little Manzos, Platanos, like, dude, there's like so many different bananas, and they're all amazing and really nutritious. But the shit that's in the store, man, honestly, it's not like you know, I won't go as far to be like, oh, it's all poison, bro. Like, don't eat fruits and vegetables. Like, nah, you do get some good nutritional content from a lot of the prickly pears you may buy in the store, or fruits or veggies. But what I'm just saying is, if that shit is helping you and it's produced in such a shitty way, imagine the shit that's actually produced well, what the fuck it'll do for your body. You know, people talk about the prickly pear oil being super good for their skin and, you know, beauty products and hair and all that. And I'm just like, it's coming from a shitty quality Opuntia ficus indica. Like, I can't imagine when I make this shit, like, you know, the quality of stuff that I could produce. But, yeah, I mean, today, I guess the goal was to just open your mind to Opuntia ficus indica and to Opuntia in general, and realize that sometimes it's not the plant, it's the human, the cultivator, the farmer. And that's something I've learned over many years, you know, because I have continuously failed with Opuntia ficus indica and cultivating it, and it's been a really hard time seeing thousands of these Opuntia ficus indica die for me. But it's been a learning process, and don't go through the same mistakes I did. Just start with good genetics to begin with, you know. I was trying to improve a shitty plant. Whereas then I said, okay, no, fuck that, scrap that. I'm going to improve plants that already have shown some potential, and then work off that, because nature already has shown me that this plant could do something, you know, instead of trying to improve this crap that I was, you know, getting imported or whatever. And you know, I won't say who I imported it from, because it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. The point that I'm making is not to hate on Mexican Opuntia, because I'm sure there's people like me in Mexico and other of my friends that grow a polyculture of Opuntia ficus indica, and you could be importing their stuff, and it's amazing. But the same thing, you know, at the border, they're still going to chemically spray it. But side note, you know, I mean, it could be a better plant, is the point I was making. But yes, in many cases, when you have a shitty agave, you have a shitty cactus, you have a shitty tree, like in many of the citrus today, it's the fault of the farmer. It's not the fault of the plant. And the plant has shown us lots of different traits that we just ignore, and sometimes, you know, we choose the faster or the more productive, but many of those times they are the weakest genetically plants. So just, you know, it kind of reminds me of like the gym bros, you know. It's like these people that are extreme. Like I remember one time I hired like two dudes, and I'm a skinny guy, you know, but I'm a farmer, and then they couldn't lift like asphalt shingles, and like they were throwing up after a few hours, and I'm just like, all right, go home, bro. You know, pay their Uber so they could go home, and paid them for the day, and just told them, yeah, I don't think it's gonna work out. But the point is, man, some of these gym dudes be looking like fucking The Rock, Hulk Hogan and shit, and you put them an hour or two on the farm, and these fuckers crack, you know. And sometimes that's how these agave or these cactus are, you know. They look good on paper, strong as fuck, big as fuck, fast as fuck. But then when you put them to the test for endurance, they just trash, you know. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people in California, for instance, fail with espadin. Most of those people, well, actually I can't think of one that did not import those espadin, you know. The espadin that I found in Pasadena, that I started distributing to agave farmers here in California, has actually performed pretty well for people. But every single one I know that was imported has been trash and have all died, underperformed for many, many farmers in many different climates. And I'm just like, damn, bro, like, you know, it's like the Opuntia ficus indica. I'm like, damn, espadin sucks balls, you know. But then I find a cultivar that is cold hardy, heat hardy, wind hardy, and drought tolerant, and I'm like, oh shit, this is the complete opposite of what the fuck I know about espadin. I barely watered it, it grew great, and ended up selling them. I'm not a huge fan of espadin, so I didn't keep it. But I'm sure those people were excited to get a cultivar of espadin that was grown in the United States and adapted here a bit, right? Because the shit that they're getting from Mexico is not working out for anybody. Tequiliana has worked out for many farmers. I would say like, you know, a dozen or so, but for, I would say, triple or quadruple that amount, it's failed tremendously. And the same thing with tequiliana. It may suck balls, the clones, but maybe if you seed the shit out of fucking 100,000 tequiliana, you start to get some good agave tequiliana. And the same thing may be the case with Opuntia ficus indica. But yeah, the point of today's podcast was sometimes we think the plants suck, and it's always kind of like what I tell you with business people. It's like, nah, it's the farmer that sucks actually, and we need to rethink how we're approaching these plants, right? Because we're thinking they can't go places where they can go. You just need a little bit of work in getting them up to par, right? Bringing back those traits that, like I said, the indigenous were prioritizing for a long, long time, right? The indigenous didn't have irrigation. They were prioritizing drought tolerance. The indigenous didn't have shade tarps. The indigenous didn't have the ability to miss the fuck during a heat wave. They grew hardier and hardier plants. And, you know, it's crazy that some of these Opuntia and agave now that are being discovered in the USA, they're being discovered, but they're not classifying them as wild. So there's certain agave that have been discovered in you know, the Southwest. Oh, got some fucking grass in my mouth. Shit. And these have been described as what do you call it? I forget the name that they put on it. But see, it's weird because they have native genetics, but they're not native. So they know they're not from the wild. Like, they know that they've been bred by humans, and that's how they got to that agave or that Opuntia. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Because now they're wild, because a lot of these indigenous communities have forgot or gave up, or just do, at a lesser degree, agave or Opuntia farming or cultivation, right? So these are species that were for centuries or even possibly millennia cultivated by people and improved. And that's a great place to fucking start, honestly, for USA Opuntia and agave. And we got to go back to the indigenous and utilize what they were utilizing. You get me? And there's ways to work together, right? Like, here I'm growing the Opuntia littoralis and Opuntia ficanta, right? Well, the Tongala of LA, the Chumash of Santa Barbara, places that, in Santa Barbara I went to school, LA I grew up, the ficanta is native here to the Mojave Desert, the Paiute, and different tribes grew it here. And my point is, there's ways for us to work together, right? Like where you could utilize these native plants to help the indigenous restore their cultivation of the plant, culture of the plant, use of the plant, and at the same time, then you guys can work together to, learn, right? So a lot of the stuff that I make here, has been inspired by indigenous knowledge of me talking with people, you know, my parents, my grandparents, or people here in the USA or Mexico. And then, you know, I'm always giving them plants and stuff because I'm like, thanks, you know, for teaching me. And they feel grateful, I feel grateful. But my point is, don't take stuff for free, right? If an indigenous person is teaching you about how they use their cactus and you're growing that cactus, give them some fucking cactus so they can grow more of it, bro. But yeah, I think there's ways for cactus farmers to really work together with indigenous tribes in the Southwest and restore a lot of that use, because if those indigenous people start restoring it, I mean, like I give an example, the agave that they just recently discovered, the 6 in the Southwest that were in Arizona or whatever, these new agaves that, you know, like the San Pedroensis or whatever. Well, these agaves, they were literally told by natives where the fuck they were. This is where I dislike sometimes. They're like, oh, this researcher discovered this agave, or these 6 agaves, right? Like I'm describing to you. No, the natives went and literally pointed to it. They're like, this is the one that you're looking for. Not discovered, more like, yeah, the natives just showed them where it was at. But the point is, we need to make more friends of the natives, because there's lots of Opuntia, I'm sure, in agave that it's not like they're hiding it, but why would they share that knowledge with us, or you know, if we're not even respecting them? So, once again, gotta work with the indigenous of the Southwest, or if you're in Mexico, of your area in Mexico, to reconnect with this plant. You get me? With the Opuntia, with the agave. But yeah, hope you learned something today. That's the podcast. Opuntia ficus indica. I think it's a really strong candidate for USA agave here as well. Not as strong as a lot of the USA Opuntia, but maybe through some hybridization, like I was saying, it can be you know, something that's a great improvement. Because, you know, the Opuntia and Tequiliana and littorales, these fuckers don't need any improvement. They could be immediately cultivated like in a lot of the United States. But anyways, yeah, Opuntia ficus indica is not a shitty plant. The clones that people farm are shitty plants, and I think sometimes that's where people get it confused. But it's because 99% of the Opuntia ficus indica is a shitty plant, and 99% of the Agave tequiliana is a shitty plant, in my opinion. So it's like, you know, that's what I talk about sometimes, or people think I'm talking about sometimes, because that's what the majority is. But I've seen lots of these plants be great plants. They need a great farmer sometimes too. But yeah, hope you learned something today, maybe about Opuntia ficus indica, or about propagating Opuntia, or why agave genetics and diversity is important. But you know, cactus farming is, I wouldn't say new, but farming it outside of a lot of these main species, it's been forgotten. And we got to return to utilizing it. You know, cactus, I was speaking with somebody in Brazil who wants to do bioenergy, and he wants to grow agave, and, you know, at the end of the convo, like, I just kind of convinced this guy, like, he should probably be growing cactus, you know, because he's, like, kept, like, he repeated to me, like, 10 times, like, cheapness, efficiency, like, all this, and I'm like, dude, agave, I mean, fuck, I could grow you biomass 10 times as fast with cactus that produces shit that's going to be great for biomethane or bioethanol, biohydrogen. Why the fuck would you need agave, you know? I grow agave because it's part of my heritage, and I think it's an amazing plant. Sorry, I got a call. But yeah, I think it's an amazing plant, you know, agave, Opuntia. I don't grow it necessarily for one purpose, and because it's got 1,000 uses, you know. I'm not tripping about growing both the species, but if you're looking for a specific use, you know, maybe one species will work better for you, you know. I would never do a monoculture, but I'm just saying, like, you know, you're probably, like, if you're doing bioenergy, you're probably better off with 5 cacti species that are the best cacti biomass producers than the best 5 agave species. I'll tell you that much, right? It's like, you don't need a monoculture, but, yeah. you know, everybody's got different applications for their Opuntia. But yeah, I just wanted to have this podcast for you guys out today, and there's a lot still to learn in cactus farming, forgotten knowledge, new knowledge, and I'm just always excited to keep, you know, learning every day about Opuntia. And if ficus indica has taught me anything, is that you can't ever be 100% sure about something, because for years and years I thought that plant would never succeed for me and kept failing at it, but something told me kept trying, you know, and then we found some stuff that worked. So I'm sure that'll be the case with a lot of people that failed with Agave tequiliana or espadin in the US and California. If they do want to cultivate it, they're going to have to try different stuff. But that's also the lesson, right? I kept trying Mexican imported Opuntia from different sources, and they were all shitty sources. You know, like change it up, right? Like if you got agave or Opuntia Nopales from an industrial monoculture farm in Mexico and it don't work, immediately switch it up. Go to like the small polyculture Opuntia farmer and get stuff from him if you want to import, and it may be more expensive, but you're going to save yourself a hell of a fucking amount of time and trouble in growing it. I'll tell you that much. So I should have done that earlier, and that's definitely a lesson for y'all, maybe, that pivot quicker when something's not working. Farmers are kind of hard-headed in that sense, that we're like, we're gonna fucking make it work, man. And nah, man, sometimes just fucking give up and try another way. You know, older I get, the more I apply that. But anyways, hope you learned something today about Opuntia ficus indica. Give it another shot if you were like me and you said it sucks balls, I'm never growing this shit again. Start some shit from seeds, yeah. But yeah, have a great rest of the day, y'all. Agave and cactus talk. God damn, can't fucking speak for shit. Agave and cactus talk out. Peace.